There's a lot of confusion this morning about this situation where people who have tested positive to COVID before 6 o'clock on Tuesday night are potentially disenfranchised. We had Carla, a voter from Dixon in Queensland, on the show earlier. She is angry about this situation. It could affect hundreds of thousands of people. Can you offer Australians any clarity on this situation?
Well, sure, and the Australian Electoral Commissioner, I'm sure, will make further comment. But as we know, we have an independent election process in Australia, and what that means is that the laws that were agreed by all parties going into this election about how COVID would be managed have given those authorities to the Electoral Commissioner. This morning he's looking at these issues very closely, and we've certainly asked him to do that, and any recommendations that he makes in order to manage this issue, which, you know, running an election still with COVID is not an easy thing, and we want to make sure Australians have as much opportunity as they should in a democracy to vote, and any recommendations the Electoral Commissioner provides to us, then certainly we'll act on, whether that means changing regulations or anything of that nature. So we'll take his advice. I mean, it's not something for politicians to interfere in, as I'm sure you'd appreciate. We have an independent election process, but we're ensuring that the Commissioner has every support to ensure that he can conduct the election in the best possible way. OK, we wait to see what the AEC says today. So, Prime Minister, we got this Ipsos poll in the Financial Review today showing a jump in the primary vote for the Coalition, a fall in Labor's primary vote, but Anthony Albanese is ahead of you as preferred Prime Minister. Is your biggest fear that while voters in some parts of the country might want to re-elect the Coalition, they simply cannot stomach another 3 years of you? The figure that I frankly was most interested in over the last 24 hours was 94,500 more full-time jobs and unemployment falling to a 48-year low of 3.9%. I mean, this is an extraordinary achievement by Australians, and particularly those businesses who've been employing those Australians. And this means that our economic plan is working because I know Australians are working. And this is the big issue at this election. This election is about who can best manage our economy and manage finances, because if you can't manage money, then you can't deliver on issues like Medicare, on the National Disability Insurance Scheme, on aged care. If you can't manage money, as we saw yesterday from Labor, they released their costings. I know why they didn't release them for all those weeks, because it means $60 billion in more debt, $8.5 billion in higher deficits, and we know when Labor can't manage money, they always come after yours in higher taxes. Now, this will only put further pressure on inflation, further pressure on interest rates by reckless spending, which will see Australians suffer as a result of Labor's inability to manage money. The jobless rate, unmistakably great news, but Prime Minister, I'll ask the question again. Do you worry that you personally are a huge drag on the Coalition's vote? Well, what I've done over the last 3 years is show the leadership necessary to get Australia through the worst financial, economic and health crisis we've seen in 100 years. The voters, according to the polls, that has required strength. They hear that, but they're not buying what you're selling. Polls don't determine elections, and neither do politicians and neither do journalists. Australians, the many quiet ones out there working hard every day to ensure that they can get through each and every day's challenges, and they're looking to plan for their future with confidence. And they can do that with a government that has been able to demonstrate its economic competence. Over the course of this campaign, we've seen that Mr Albanese just doesn't understand the economy. Yesterday, he didn't even know the borders were open. Now, this is the sort of stuff Prime Ministers need to know, and we've seen that he's not up to that job, and it's bigger than him. And what I've demonstrated over these last 3 years, not everybody's agreed with me, Michael, and not everybody likes me, but that's not the point. The point is who can manage the nation's finances to keep downward pressure on rising interest rates, downward pressure on costs of living. And what we saw yesterday from Labor was higher debt, higher deficit, which can only lead to more pressure on inflation and interest rates, and higher taxes, which is what we know Labor always do when they can't manage money. They come after yours. We had David Spears on the show earlier, and he says he finds it absolutely extraordinary that a Liberal Prime Minister is essentially persona non grata in those seats facing strong challenges from Teal independents, including the seat held by your deputy, Josh Frydenberg. Why do you believe you are so toxic in those seats? I have fantastic members in all of those seats, and I have great confidence in them. Why don't you campaign alongside? Josh Frydenberg's in the battle of his political life, as he says. Why haven't you been there side by side with your deputy, helping him win his seat? I was in Kooyong during this campaign with my deputy. I was there on Passover.
Yeah.
I was there with the Jewish community in his own electorate. So to suggest I haven't been campaigning with Josh is just
But you haven't been campaigning. That was to celebrate Passover, which is understandable. But going to venues, to businesses,
it was actually meeting with the Jewish Community Centre. I was actually at a Jewish community centre with Josh, which also was a synagogue, and I've been with Josh on many occasions during the course of campaign. We've done press conferences together. So to suggest that Josh and I aren't campaigning together is just ridiculous. And Josh and I have been the economic team, together with Simon Birmingham, that has ensured that we've been able to get the country, when we were facing a 15% unemployment rate during the pandemic, now we have a 3.9%. Now remember, when Labor was in power, they took unemployment from 4.4% up to 5.7%. Yeah, they faced the GFC, but we've faced a global crisis 30 times worse than the GFC. We've kept the AAA credit rating. We've got unemployment down and got an employment outcome 50% better than was achieved in the GFC.
Yep.
That's what strong economic management delivers. That's what a strong economic plan delivers. And that's what secures our future and a stronger future, not the risk of Labor, which even on their best estimates, before they've even got their hands on the levers, would see $8.5 billion in higher deficits, $60 billion in higher debt, which puts pressure up on inflation and on interest rates.
We've heard the economic picture. I just want to ask, finally, you've promised to be less bulldozer and more empathetic. Wouldn't an extraordinary act of empathy, Prime Minister, be to simply allow the Murugappan family to go home to Biloela?
Well, there's two issues going on there. One is a ministerial intervention case, which is being considered by the Minister for Immigration, and he does that independently. And so that is a matter for the Minister for Immigration. But on the second point, there are court matters that are still proceeding on this particular issue, and to date there has not been a finding that Australia has a protection obligation in that case.
But as you know, the Minister can with a stroke of a pen, override that legislation and allow this family to go home. Why can't Alex Hawke, your Minister, do that?
Well, I just confirmed that that's a ministerial intervention case, and he makes that independently. He doesn't do that on the basis of my recommendation or anyone else's, and he considers the matters before him. Well, again, I don't pressure my ministers on these one way or the other. That's why it's called ministerial intervention, and it's independent. But I make this point. Australia's borders have been secure because we've ensured that we do not send messages. I mean, right now, you've seen the reports. People smugglers offering $30,000 packages to get people to Australia. I mean, Labor cannot be trusted on our borders. They will abolish temporary protection visas. They think it will save them $400 million. But I remember when Kevin Rudd abolished it, it ended up costing Australians $17 billion because he lost control of the borders, and it all marked from that day. Labor have learnt nothing. And the most compassionate thing you can do to support people from coming around the world, we've got 7,500 people we've already granted visas to from the Ukraine, 16,500 additional visas to provide places for people coming out of Afghanistan. When you do the process the right way and you don't grant visas where people have illegally entered Australia, that's how you can provide the most compassionate response without letting people die at sea and crash our borders, which is what Labor did last time.
Prime Minister, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks a lot, Michael.